2011, on my 21st birthday, I took it upon myself to go backpacking through the Canadian mountains all on my own. I had gone backpacking and camping many times before, but never solo. I wanted this birthday's significance to be rooted in the fact that I had challenged the great outdoors completely by myself. On my third day out, I reached my destination. It was an old farmhouse sitting alone in an overgrown field out in the middle of nowhere. I had discovered it earlier on Google Earth and was eager to check it out before heading back. In addition to a first aid kit, a compass, and a utility knife, I carried a Smith & Wesson Governor revolver with 6 shots. It was the crown jewel of my father's collection, and he had loaned it to me for protection while I was out in the woods. He made sure I had practiced with it several times and knew exactly how to use it before I left. As I approached the farmhouse, I was glad I had the weapon, because I wasn't entirely sure the place was abandoned. Every ground floor window was boarded up, and a faded plastic pinwheel spun lazily in the dirt by the front door. I walked up the front steps and, feeling somewhat foolish, I knocked. When no one answered, I circled the house. An ancient, rusty fire escape dangled from one of the upstairs windows, and an old refrigerator lay on its side among the tall grass. Back at the front, I tried the knob. Rusty, but with some force I managed to turn it and the door creaked open. I was just about to step inside when I felt the sensation of eyes on me. Out by the tree line, I saw what appeared to be a man with a long gray beard staring directly at me. Instantly, I felt guilty and nervous. I waved at him with one hand, the other resting on the revolver at my belt. "Hi there, is this your place? I'm sorry, I'll leave." For 10 long seconds, the man just stared. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the trees. That unsettled me more than if he had yelled. The last thing I wanted was to go back into the woods knowing he was somewhere out there. So, I stepped inside the farmhouse and shut the door behind me. I dragged a dusty stool in front of the door so I'd hear it crash if anyone tried to come in. For the next hour, I explored the dark rooms, always glancing out the windows for another glimpse of the man. As night fell, my nerves kept me from leaving. Instead, I climbed a narrow staircase to the attic, locked the door behind me, set up my gas lantern, and unrolled my sleeping bag. After a light dinner, I wrote in my journal, turned off the lantern, and tried to sleep. That's when I heard it, faint creaking on the stairs. My eyes shot open. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, aiming them both at the attic door. The footsteps grew louder, climbing the staircase without hesitation. "Who's there?" I shouted. "If I'm trespassing, I leave. Just don't open the door. I have a gun." The steps didn't stop. Soon they reached the landing. The doorknob rattled. "Don't try it. I told you I have a gun. Just tell me who you are." There was a pause, and then the knob jiggled harder. "Stop! I'll shoot." I forced myself to count to 5. The jiggling continued. "Last chance." I counted again, my heart pounding, then fired 2 shots low through the door, aiming for the legs of whoever was there. Silence. No cry of pain. No body falling down the stairs. Just silence. I unlocked the door and cracked it open, my gun ready. Nothing. No one. Not even a drop of blood. Panicking, I slammed it shut, locked it again, and shoved an old rusty armchair in front of it. The rest of the night was a blur of dozing off, waking up, gripping my revolver, and waiting for dawn. When sunlight finally poured in, I gathered my things, climbed out the attic window, and escaped down the fire escape. I was about 20 steps away from the house when I turned back. Looking down at me from the attic window was the bearded old man. I raised my revolver, aiming at him as a warning not to follow, then sprinted into the woods without looking back. 2 years later, in the summer of 2013, I returned with 4 of my friends. I showed them the bullet holes still lodged in the attic door. I still go camping every now and then, but I always make sure I bring my handgun. Because out there in the wilderness, you never know who might be watching you from the shadows. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, following you, even when no one was there? For me, that feeling wasn't just paranoia. It became terrifyingly real, and the memories of it still keep me awake at night. I do admit this story has a very fine line between bizarre and abusive, but overall, it's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. In all honesty, I've had a lot of creepy encounters, known a lot of normal people that ended up doing very bad things. Sometimes I almost feel like I'm cursed to make friends with rough edges. This whole situation started when I was a sophomore in high school. I showed up to school one day and noticed a new boy in my class. I was your atypical goth girl, and this guy was a teenage bad boy dream. Piercings, leather jacket, reading some sort of obscure novel. I was hooked at first sight. I introduced myself, and soon enough, we were dating. He will henceforth be referred to as X for the rest of the story. Now for a little background. I was brought up in an alcoholic parent's home. There were many times I was living by myself or with a friend because one of my parents was in the hospital. Despite the chaos in my family life, I still managed to go to school every day and pull in decent enough grades. After one time too many, however, I was left for 2+ months living alone. Instead of coming home to an empty house, I asked X if I could live with him since he was closer to school. He and his parents happily welcomed me into their home. At this point in the relationship, maybe 5 months in, we were phasing out of the puppy love stage, and I was starting to notice some very serious red flags. X was very mental and started cutting regularly. His parents were very heavy drug users. There would be times I would try talking to X, and he would literally stare off into space and not notice my existence. He was never mean or abusive towards me, but I could definitely tell something was unhooking in him. When we started living together, it started to become very evident something was very, very wrong. He started to tell me he thought he was possessed by demons and couldn't control himself. We both spiraled into moderate drug use. I started skipping school, and he started seeing more of these demons. In all truth, I hadn't realized what a home I had dug myself into by living with him. One night, we ended up falling asleep after smoking a bong and watching a movie. It was a big house, and we were living in the garden-level basement, 2 or so floors below his parents and siblings. Around midnight, I was woken up by the most frightening screech I'd ever heard. X was right next to me in bed, contorting, convulsing, and screaming bloody murder. At first, I thought it was just a seizure. I've seen friends have seizures before, and I didn't interfere, only looking for one of our cell phones to call 911. As I got up out of the bed, he looked me dead in the eyes. The blood drained from my veins, I've never seen such hate. Everything seemed to happen in flashes from there. He never broke eye contact as he slowly rose from the bed. It almost looked as if he was a marionette on a set of strings, pulled up with sunken shoulders. The half-smile formed on his face as his body twitched. He started walking towards me. I can't describe how terrified I was, cornered in the room opposite to the door. I felt my ears swell and ring. He started screeching at me, coming within a centimeter of my face, never breaking his gaze. I started pushing him, yelling at him to cut it out, but it was like trying to push away a stone statue. He would not move. He finally started talking, ranting about the demon, and not making a single word of sense. As bizarre as it was, I knew he was having some sort of mental episode. I truly did fear for my life, and knew I needed to escape. Suddenly, I felt as if I was sucked back into the moment, and my senses were incredibly acute. I noticed the window we had cracked open earlier. I pushed the window back, punched through the screen, and climbed out as he stood silently staring after me. I'm pretty sure I stayed outside for an hour, hyperventilating, before I decided to ring the doorbell. One of his parents answered, very confused, and set me up with a blanket on the couch on the first floor, with no questions asked. In the morning, X came up and acted as if nothing had happened. No matter how much I pestered him about it, it was as if it had been a bad dream. I made arrangements to stay with another friend that day, and broke up with X about a week after. Once I was actually able to face him again. Sometimes I wonder if it had been some sort of sick joke to get me out of his house, or out of the relationship. But I watched unshocked in the years after as he fell into severe drug abuse and mental illness. At one point, I went to a school counselor and told them how worried I was for him, but it only made him hold a grudge against me. After everything that happened, I really started to feel sorry for him, and sort of weirdly forgave him for what he did. He tried contacting me a few times after everything that happened, but as the years went by, I heard less and less. Last I heard, he was addicted to meth and living on the streets. I'm 23 years old, and as a child, my family and I would spend all 3 months of summer at my grandpa's huge farmhouse in Tirana, Albania, which is around 7 miles from the nearest town. Apart from an old computer, my grandparents have a complete lack of recent technology, so I often found myself exploring woods, taking long, relaxing walks, which I liked because it gave me time to think. And a lot of the time I went hunting with my dad and grandpa in search of coyotes and boxers, which would kill our livestock. Just to be more clear, I'd been taught to shoot for years at this point, and I found myself to be quite a good shot. One particular day, it was around 1 p.m., bored out of my mind, I decided to take my grandpa's 2 German shepherds for a walk. Eventually, we got to one of my favorite places, a crystal clear river around 7 feet wide. Walking, I noticed a tall man on the other side of the river with his back turned to me. He was wearing a pair of black jeans and a hoodie, which I found odd considering it's around 80 degrees this time of year. Even more concerning is that there's usually nobody around for at least a few miles. Despite this, I spoke to him and asked if he was lost or if he needed any directions. He ignored me completely, not even acknowledging I was there. I continued to walk and had eventually made some distance from this person. Then I heard him crossing the river and come across to the side I was standing on. I turned around to see him just standing there with his eyes wide open, almost as if he was surprised to see me. Trying not to think much of this, I continued walking, only to notice that he was following me at a slightly faster pace. I turned around and said, "Do you want something, sir?" I said this in confidence simply because I had my grandpa's 2 dogs with me. He began to walk much faster towards me. Now I was genuinely scared. I knew nothing of this man, who he was, what he wanted, if he was armed. So I ran to avoid leading him directly to my grandpa's farmhouse. I cut through a small woodland, at which point I thought I'd lost him and continued to make my way back home. I spoke nothing of this to my parents. That same night, I went ahead to my room and decided to call it a night. At around 2 a.m., I was woken with the sound of leaves being stepped on right outside the sliding door to my room. Slightly alarmed, I decided not to get worried, hoping it was just one of the dogs. So I lay back down, facing away from the door. A few seconds later, I saw this shadow creep up at my door. I was frozen in pure shock. Slowly turning around, I saw the figure of a man. I rushed to switch on the lamp by the side of my bed and quickly picked up my grandpa's old Carcano rifle. Trying to sound intimidating, I told the guy to get away in a rather squeamish voice. He stood there for a few seconds and then quickly pushed my sliding door to the side. Knowing full well I didn't have it in me to shoot him, I screamed for my dad as loud as I could. He continued to stare at me until my dad barged the door open and he ran into the woodland. In anger, my dad took the rifle out of my hands and started shooting into the night in hopes of one of the rounds catching him. The next morning, the police were called, but could do nothing about it apart from file a report. I didn't know if it was the man from the river or not, so again, I ended up saying nothing. I thought if I did, I could get an innocent man arrested. Around 2 weeks later, I still hadn't gotten over what had happened. On that day's paper, we saw an article titled 18-year-old boy murdered in his sleep. I translated this as best as I could from Albanian. At the bottom of the article, there was a picture of the man I saw at the river, with the same surprised expression, as if he had no idea what was going on. My parents didn't let me fully read the article, knowing it would just make me feel worse. To this day, I feel two things: regret that I didn't pull the trigger, and guilt knowing that if I had, that boy would still be alive today. His figure still haunts me.
This happened on a Norwegian peninsula when I was about 15 years old. It must have been 2006, give or take a year. Regardless, it was Halloween night and I didn't really have any plans. Too old for trick-or-treating, too young for partying. It was a small peninsula anyway, so there wasn't much going on. I was just sat at home playing RuneScape on my desktop. This continued until sundown. You could say I was mildly addicted to that game. I usually like to play with the lights off. Bad for your eyes, but I like the mood it set. Anyway, it's around 9 p.m. My mom comes into my room and pats me on the shoulder. "Didn't you hear me? I said I'm going out for 20 minutes, she said. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, so I was oblivious to the fact that she had been shouting to me. She heads downstairs and I hear the door slam. I put my headphones back on and sink back into my own little pixelated world. As such, I can't really tell you how much time passed when this happened. When you looked out of my bedroom door, which at the time was wide open, you could see down into the long corridor leading to my mum's room opposite. Since all of the lights were off, I could only really make out the outlines of all the objects. And that was only after my eyes adjusted after looking at the bright computer screen. Until then, it was like looking into a dark void of total blackness. You know when one of your senses has picked up on something that you're not totally conscious of yet, and you feel a little uneasy? Well, that happened to me while I was playing. It felt like someone else was around me, like that "I'm being watched" sensation. I figure my mum came back from wherever she went, and that I just hadn't heard her due to my headphones. But if that was the case, why hadn't she turned the lights on? I looked down into the dark corridor. At the far end, something's glowing. It's large and fluorescent green. It's spherical. Looks like a floating orb of some kind. I freak out and whip off my headphones. After looking at it for a moment, it becomes clear that this isn't an orb at all, or anything supernatural like that. There's two black holes where eyes should be, and a dark slit for a mouth. It's a glow-in-the-dark mask, and it's not floating. Someone's wearing it. Whoever it is, he is facing me. I can't make out the rest of their body, but the head is definitely looking in my direction and is slowly inching closer. It's some sort of distorted, expressionless face. It's hard to describe, but the image of it is burned deep into my memory. Realizing he's been spotted, the guy freezes. We just stare at each other for what felt like the longest time. He raises a finger up to the lips of his mask. I'm just a trick-or-treater. It's a thick, manly voice, one I didn't recognize. In a state of shock and not really knowing how to react, I just sit there, keeping my eyes on him. So, trick or treat, I mumble out. Neither. Please go now. But he doesn't go. The glowing face starts moving towards me. Desperate to keep him out of my bedroom, I leap up and slam my door closed, locking it and pressing the full weight of my body against it. The guy is just outside my door. I can hear his deep breaths on the other side. He tries the door handle. It rattles. More heavy breaths. He tries the handle again. Then suddenly there's a loud bang. Something heavy slams against the door. Once, twice, again and again, like he's using a hammer or his fists to break through. The wood creaks, the hinges groan. I'm sobbing, begging out loud for him to stop, whispering, "Please, please go away." The pounding grows louder, faster, the door shaking violently under my weight. For a second, I think it's going to come off the hinges and he'll be inside. Then, just as I hear one final massive slam, there's the distant wail of a police siren passing outside on the road. Instantly, everything goes silent. No more pounding, no more heavy breaths, just silence so deep it made my ears ring. After what felt like minutes of stillness, I hear hurried footsteps retreating down the stairs, then the front door opening and slamming shut. Still in shock, I just sit in my barricaded room, sobbing to myself until my mum finally returns. It felt like forever since I'd last seen her. She asked me what was wrong, why I was crying, and why there was a large Hessian sack left in the corridor. I told her what had just happened. She called the police for me immediately. I like to think that this was just a crazy person and that they didn't really have any intention of harming me. Just some sort of messed up Halloween prank. Whatever the case, it was a surreal experience, and the image of that floating, talking face has haunted me for the longest time. The most unnerving part about this to me, though, is the fact that the peninsula really was very small. For me to see a face around town that I didn't recognize was very rare. More than likely, someone in my family knew who this person was. Hell, I probably knew who it was. I hate to think that after that event, I may very well have interacted with that person. The thought that they specifically targeted me out of everyone in the area made me extremely uncomfortable. I never felt safe there after that. That's part of the reason I moved away when I was 18. One time I received an invite to a website after chatting with some guy online. He told me it was something he thought I'd really like. Not really knowing what to expect, I followed the link. This was, as you probably expect, a mistake. The link took me to a site with just a video on it. The images were very poor quality and very grainy. In the video, there were 4 Chinese guys sat around a table in some crummy apartment. I'm pretty sure they were all drunk, and one of them was resting his head in his arms against the table. As the camera occasionally dipped downwards, you could see that the floor area beneath them was covered in a tarp. Nothing much else was happening. I wanted to skip forward because I was getting bored, but that's when I realized that you couldn't. This was a live stream. The guy who sent me the link said to keep waiting and just give it 5 minutes. So I popped open another tab whilst I waited and checked back on the stream every so often. At one point, when I clicked back on the video, there were only 3 of them sat around the table, and a box had appeared above the video. The words in this text box were all in Chinese. I'm pretty sure it was Chinese at least. But I remember very distinctly that there were 4 boxes, each with numbers in them that kept changing. I didn't think much of that at first. Not long afterwards, the 4th guy returns to the table. He was now holding a revolver in his hands. He sat back down at the table with the other men and placed the gun on the table. You could hear the guy holding the camera saying something, but obviously I didn't understand what. He sounded very aggressive in his tone, though. That's all I could really discern. Then there were a couple of other voices coming off camera, chiming in too. The guy at the table who had brought the gun grunted something and spun the pistol on the table. That's when I realized this was a live game of Russian roulette for some sort of gambling website. People would stake their bitcoins on what I assume was a 4-to-1 bet. That's what the changing numbers were at the top of the screen. The Chinese characters must have referred to the different guys at the table, and I assume the changing numbers were the amount of cash being staked on each player. Whether the money wagered was for that man to live or die is something that I can't answer. It was like something out of the Deer Hunter. I couldn't believe it. But these guys didn't look like they'd been captured and forced against their will to play. They just looked like tired businessmen. Maybe they were a group of desperados who really needed cash. Or maybe they really were forced. I don't really know. I should have stopped watching at that point, but I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. The guy who the gun ended up pointing at put it against his head and pulled the trigger. The chamber was empty, so he was okay. Then the next guy took the gun from him. He didn't even fucking hesitate to stick the gun in his mouth and pull. There was a brief flash. I don't know if anyone has seen the Bud Dwyer video, but it reminded me of that in the sense that there was a fucking fountain of blood coming out of his head. One little detail I remember was a small amount of smoke rising out of the man's mouth and nostrils as he collapsed back in his chair. A couple of people from off-camera came in and dragged him away in his chair. I turned that shit off immediately after seeing that. I don't know if that's a regular thing that happens on that site, or whether this was some type of one-off event that had somehow been advertised on the deep web to attract an audience. I do think about that video from time to time, along with a few other ones that I've seen. Like I said, this shit stays with you.
Been the best lately, with rent and bills to pay. It's been a struggle. In my attempt to make ends meet, though, I met someone I wish I hadn't. A few nights ago, I saw an ad on Craigslist looking for someone to help move a few large items and boxes up from the basement. The job offered $12 an hour cash, and estimated to be around 5 to 7 hours worth of work. That sounded great to me, and best of all, it was within walking distance of my house. I emailed the poster of the ad, and everything seemed great at first. He was thankful that someone had answered so quickly, because he really needed to get things done. After a few emails, though, he hits me with something. I want you to know that I'm a gay man. How old are you, by the way? That's a weird message to send. His sexuality should be none of my business. If you call up a plumber to come to your house, you don't share that information with him. I'm a 28-year-old guy, though. I'm in good shape. And I never leave the house without a knife in my boot and a sidearm on my waist. I need the money, and this guy's 68. If he tries anything, I'm confident I can handle myself. Besides that, I like to think the best of people. I try and tell myself that maybe he's just a bit flamboyant and has had trouble in the past hiring people who turned out to be homophobic. The time comes, and I get to his house. He comes off as a normal and pleasant dude right from the bat. He's polite and friendly and has a really cool house. It's your typical middle-class New England home from the early 40s. Not something I'd want to live in because you're so closed off with smaller rooms, but they have a nice charm. He's even furnished it with antiques from the time period, so I'm put a little at ease with everything going so well at first. He takes me down into the basement, and it is a bit creepy. Let's be honest here, most basements are. Even more so when it belongs to a stranger. He shows me what needs to be done, and I start getting to work. Everything goes fine for the first hour or so. Then I notice, out of the corner of my eye, he's watching me from around the corner. I try and tell myself it's no big deal. He just wants to make sure I'm not stealing any of his stuff, and that I'm doing what I'm supposed to. After a few minutes, he goes away. About 30 minutes later, he comes strolling in wearing nothing but underwear and socks. "Oh, sorry," he says. "I was just about to take a shower, and I forgot to tell you a few things." Well, that wasn't really the case, as he just repeats something he told me earlier. He's 68, though. Can't expect him to remember everything, right? A little more time goes by, and he calls me from upstairs and tells me to come and take a break and have a glass of water. Sounds good to me. I get upstairs, walk into the living room, and he's sitting on the couch completely naked. I freeze a bit, and he says, Is okay with you?" I told him that I already informed him I was straight, and if this is what he was looking for, he hired the wrong person. He starts apologizing and puts his little buddy away and begs me to please finish the job, saying that he didn't mean to make me feel uncomfortable. Again, I need the money, so I agree. I figured there's no way this guy could overpower me, and he has no idea I'm carrying. I get back to work, and everything's fine for another couple of hours. I go back upstairs once the job's done to let him know. He tells me no problem and to have a seat while he goes and gets the money. I sit down and take out my phone to browse the internet while I wait. After a few minutes, I just know he's right next to me. It's something most people always manage to realize. I don't know the science behind it, if there is any. I didn't consciously see or hear anything, but maybe your brain picks up on little cues subconsciously. Either way, I turn behind me and there he is, dick out, going to town on it. I admit I freeze a bit from the shock of it. He reaches out and puts his hand on my shoulder. Now, this is probably what creeped me out the most. With his hand on my shoulder, he leans in a little towards me, smiles and says, "Now don't go and tell anyone what you've just seen, okay? This is just our little secret. Nobody needs to know about it, right? Right?" That's not a line that should come to your mind if a 28-year-old is your normal victim. That's the kind of thing you get used to saying after doing like this to Ed. Kids. At that point, I jumped up, told him to give me the money he owes me, and started towards the door. He hands me the money while still jerking off and says again, "Don't forget, it's our secret." A few hours pass, and I receive an email from him. "Thank you for what you did for me today. I feel as though we bonded and connected on a very special level. This was a wonderful day I'll never forget. I have more work for you tomorrow. Maybe you'll learn to enjoy watching me share my private moments with you." I didn't respond. In the earliest months of 2014, I started dating my current boyfriend. We hit it off immediately, which resulted in me staying at his house multiple nights out of the week. Eventually, I ended up living there, sharing a mobile home with him and his father. The neighborhood itself was fairly creepy, one of those unnamed country areas that branch from a main road. Richard, my boyfriend's dad, would tell me stories about how the entire street was owned by one man, a guy who had gotten old in recent years and let the land go. As a result, the field beside our mobile home was overgrown with weeds and old trees. He also told me about these strange occurrences, which he attributed to two things: aliens and kids from another neighborhood. Despite his warnings and how creepy the area was, I didn't take him too seriously. After all, his biggest concern was aliens. I was unemployed for a short period of time after moving in, which left me alone in the house while my boyfriend and his dad went to work. I spent most of my days putting in job applications, cleaning up the house, and reading online. I guess you could say that my presence at the house was pretty predictable, which is the only explanation to this occurrence. On a day as unremarkable as any other, while I sat reading a book in my bedroom, I heard a car pull into our driveway. The sound was pretty distinctive, considering the area wasn't paved, but rather made up of gravel. Thinking that my boyfriend, Cody, had come home early from work, I slipped some shoes on, then started for the front door, which was on the other side of the house. Before I could reach it, a knock sounded against the glass. The front of our trailer had a sunroom, basically a front porch that is encased with windows, making it so you had to go through 2 doors before stepping into the living room. Being as paranoid as he was, Richard would usually lock the sunroom door before leaving for work, unless he was in a huge hurry. Still thinking that maybe my boyfriend had come home early from work, I opened the front door to let him in. Only it wasn't Cody at the door, but a rather short Hispanic man. He smiled at me through the glass and nodded, almost as if I was exactly who he was expecting to answer. I noticed that he had one hand behind his back, and the other was hanging at his side. I tried not to think too much about it. Beside him in our carport was a small white truck, and I could hear that the engine was still running. Hey, can I help you? I tried to make my voice as strong as I could, but it only came out shaky. I'm with the garbage company. I'm here to pick up your trash cans. I blinked, knowing immediately that this was a lie. Yes, it was common for the garbage company to come and pick up trash cans if the bill hadn't been paid, but I'd gone with Cody the week before to pay it. Not to mention, the drivers never knocked on the door. They would only ever take the cans and leave. I glanced to my left, seeing that our trash cans were still there on the outside of the sunroom, somewhat behind the house. They're right there. If you need them, then take them. This time, my voice was more assertive, causing my visitor's smile to turn into a frown. "May I come in?" he asked. I didn't verbally answer. I just shook my head. My heart dropped as I watched him reach up and grab the handle to the glass door, pulling on it to open it. The door clicked, obviously locked. The man tried to pull it again, this time harder, causing the metal to creak. I jumped back into my house and slammed the front door, locking it with purpose. It was so quiet in the house that I only noticed 2 sounds, my heart pounding, and the doorknob to our back door jiggling. There was no way it could have been the guy from the front porch. He wouldn't have had time to get to the back door, even if he ran. I yelled through the door, "I'm calling the eerie police," still baffled at the fact that this was all happening in broad daylight. I could hear the truck drive through the carport and into our backyard. Immediately after that, I took a moment to look through the blinds of a window, watching as a separate man jumped off of the back porch and into the passenger seat. To this day, I'm convinced that these men knew I was home alone and carefully planned an attack. One of them was meant to distract me while the other broke into the back door. I still don't know what was hidden behind the back of the guy at the front door. All I can say is that I'm forever thankful for how paranoid my father-in-law is. Who knows what could have happened if he hadn't locked the sunroom door?